right. We're got folks that are hopping on and joining us, but thank you all so much. I think that you are really in for a treat this afternoon with my new friend, Laura Overton, who's going to talk with us about developing those breakthrough thinking habits. So we've spent so much time today on developing ourselves and how we make sure that we keep up with our own development. And when you get into that place, sometimes it gets a little tough. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us today, Laura, about rethinking our thinking. So I want you to have as much time as possible. So I'm going to turn things over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for kind of having me here. I'm calling in from Wimbledon in London. That's London, UK. So it's evening time now. And if you kind of don't know me or don't know of the work that I've been doing in this field, I've been actually involved in learning and development for the whole of my career. So it's nearly 35 years. And the last 15 years, I've been really focusing in on a research program, a longitudinal research program, which is called Towards Maturity, and looking at maturity models for learning and development and how can we drive better business value. And basically, I believe that for me personally, I just want to champion the cause of learning and development. So it's great. Jennifer, thank you for having me at L&D Cares, because I care about learning and development, and my whole career has been really focused on that. And for me, I would say I would define myself as someone who's been basically just continually curious about how learning innovation can deliver better business value. So the whole of my career has been in that kind of space. And for me, I think if I uncover what the key thing that was about my 15 years of research, I did this program from 2004 until 2019. Asking the same question, how can we drive better business value? And I've surfaced a whole range of different activities and solutions that consistently correlated back to business value. So for me, I feel very committed to the cause, the fact that despite whatever is going on right now, as a community, when we start to do things a little bit differently, when we start to embrace learning innovation in our own lives, as well as the lives of our organization, these are some of the results that we can expect to get. So I think one of the challenges that we've got in this current situation is the fact that we ourselves are facing so much disruption. We've seen many learning professionals have been overloaded by the technology requirements into new spaces. Many have actually lost their jobs. Many are looking to come in to this area. So last year, I teamed up with Shannon Tipton, that I'm sure you know if you're based in the States, and Michelle Ockers, who I'm sure you know if you're based in Australia, because we were hungry to find out how can we as a function, as a team, as a community, emerge stronger from disruption, which is, I know, is completely in line with what we're doing here at L&D Cares. But we interviewed last year in our podcast series, we interviewed so many people around that question, and you can see here some of the advice that they gave. You know, Brandon, who is one of the L&D Cares co-hosts and founders, Simon Brown, who was just on before me, all sharing with us these kinds of insights of, you know, how we need to build our commercial acumen, how we need to be able to let go of things, how we need to build better business conversations, be more evidence-based. And in fact, a lot of the things that we were talking about this morning with the learning and development or the talent development framework about the types of skills that we needed really came through in this interview question. And in my own research, what I'd found as well was that a lot of those themes were very common. The high-performing learning teams were really starting to pull all of this together. But we've been talking about some of these activities and some of these solutions for a very, very long time. And in fact, this picture was from something that we shared back in 2013. And so one of the challenges that I think we face as a learning community is that effective practices that drive business value, which is critical for us right now to be really valuable in the world of business, you know, that those practices aren't unprecedented. we've known about them. In fact, I was talking with Jennifer just beforehand. I'm saying, did you know about these things, that we need to have a better alignment with business? We need to have a more active learner voice in the way that we design things. We need to be designing that goes beyond the course in order to solve business problems. And when we were talking, Jennifer, weren't we, about the fact that, this is common talk, but it's uncommon practice. So through the Emerging Stronger interviews and podcasts and combining that with some of the research, I was starting to think to myself, why? What actually stops us? And that's what's brought me back to this concept of thinking habits. And, when we actually think about what influences our behavior, this is a common model that we see often in mental health. But, our thoughts, they impact our feelings and emotions impact our behaviors. And some of us are familiar with this in terms of looking at cognitive science and instructional design. Intellectually, we know we ought to be doing something, but emotionally, that elephant that we're riding often doesn't want to go there. And that's really made me start to think about, what do we think about thinking? Now, as learning and development professionals, we tend to know a lot about the brain, and we talk a lot about it. So we talk about cognitive science, and we use some of the things like motivation and behavioral change when we're thinking about instructional design. That's powerful stuff. We think about heuristics and bias, cognitive bias, particularly if we're looking at diversity and inclusion. Often thinking about attitudes and beliefs and how that might stop the people that we're supporting to actually influence our behaviors. And we think often about mental models. How can we deliberately choose a mental model that will allow us to be able to think about a problem in a different way? So we think a lot about thinking when it comes to our service for other people. But how often do we actually think about the kind of thinking habits that influence our own professional behavior and our professional lives? And that's really something I just want to share with you today. I'm very interested to see your thoughts and comments on this in the feed. Please join in with that chat. But one of the things that I kind of struck on is that we probably need a definition of what are thinking habits. And for me, they're those kind of persistent perspectives, those kind of settled ways and tendencies that we have that actually influence how we think, predominantly for me in this session, about our professional lives at work. So the thinking habits that influence our professional lives at work. Now, we've already heard about Simon talking about curiosity, and we heard Catherine this morning in the keynote talking about self-efficacy and our drive to become more self-directed learners. But I'm interested in the actual habits that we use to make professional decisions, and that's kind of led me to share some of these thoughts in an ebook, which you can download. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you can look at publications and go straight to the link there. So I think one of the things that we want to talk about just briefly before we look at those thinking habits is that repetition reinforces the habits. So the things that we repeat in our lives will reinforce the way that we think about our professional lives. So what do I mean by that? The things that we do every day, the things that we're asked to do every day, whether it's instructional design or coursework, the things that we celebrate every day, they kind of influence our emotions, the things that are easy for us because they're patterns that we get into every day, are the things that have worked for us in the past. These are all things that we have got tendencies to repeat and therefore create potentially patterns in our mind that are very difficult to shift. Now, disruption provides us with an ideal opportunity to do that. And one of the reasons I think it's important for us to reflect on our own thinking habits is the fact that they are actually so foundational in pretty much everything else that we do. They lay those foundations. They influence the decisions that we make relating to technology, our response to opportunity and change and the challenges that we're all facing at the moment. They influence our go-to behavior. So even though our mind and our knowledge and everything that we've learned in the last few days might be telling us we need to perhaps be doing something different, our thinking habits will potentially influence ultimately how we behave. Now, if we're new in the industry and we're trying to move into learning and development, then that's brilliant. There's a great opportunity for us to develop strong thinking habits that will help us create those foundations that are needed in our industry right now to drive that value that we were talking about. So if we actually think about digging into those thinking habits, now I put this quote up from Harold Jarkey from Canada up here, because actually this is very new thinking. It's something that I'm really playing with at the moment. So I'd love to know whether or not this would resonates with you. But let me kind of share with you what I mean here. If you're a modern learning professional, which you are, when you look in the mirror and you see yourself, what do you see? Who are you as a learning and development professional? Let me give you a couple of examples of that. How do you see your value when you think about your interface? Lisa, thank you there. It's a change agent, to see where your role there. What is your essential role in the organization? I love your comment there, Lisa. For me, the essential role of learning and development is actually to get people ready. Ready for change, ready for the next role, ready to perform, ready to give their best, ready to support the organization in giving their best. And that often, as you say, Lisa, creates change. Also, I think another thing, when we look in the mirror, how do we genuinely see our relationship with other people? And how do we think about our timescales when we look in the mirror and think, am I here to move fast? Am I here to, hold the pace and think long term? And also, how do I see myself when it comes down to risk and innovation? And obviously, the disruption has caused that in this space. And when I've been thinking about these different areas of, what do we see when we're standing in front of the mirror? What I've found when I've looked at the observations and when I've looked at those people in our environment, say, how do we emerge stronger? I see there's kind of almost like a continuum, a spectrum, and this is what we explore in the ebook. So if I'm going a little bit fast now, I really want to just introduce you to the idea, because actually this is something for you to reflect on yourself. So when we think about business, your value, do you think of yourself as a kind of learning first? The value I bring is I solve learning problems for the organization. Or do you think of yourself, the value I bring is I solve business problems through the organization? And sometimes that's through a learning course. Other times it's about how I work with other people in order to help the organization be ready for change. Now, I don't know how you feel about this, but Jennifer, can I ask you to come off mic? And I'd love to get people's views in feed as well. But, what do you see, Jennifer, when you're working with learning and development? Where do you think we tend to be on that spectrum? And please, others join in the feed too.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some other thoughts as well. But, for myself, I think when you solve, I see both of these. I see we're working to solve the business problems by solving the learning problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I see both of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me,
often these spectrums are and it's this and this.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting comment that you've made there. What about others in the room? So when you look in the mirror and you think, my true value, where does that come from? I'd love to get your sense of, are you to the right, to the left of this continuum? I appreciate that some might want to reflect personally and quietly to themselves. I think this is more of a reflective exercise, because how we have our thinking habits, they will influence how we respond in the new world of work. And certainly we found for those who are emerging stronger, everyone in our advice, and also everybody who has taken part in the research program that I've been running, are saying actually if we want to be resilient through disruption and really think differently about our solutions, then we need to kind of start to move to becoming primarily a business first thinking habit. And I want to share a few examples of this in a moment. So another one is, how do we see our role? Now, in one sense, we can see ourselves, we need to be knowledgeable experts. And for those moving new into the industry, that sense of credentialing and needing to know about instructional design, needing to know how to be a good coach, absolutely. And also as professionals in our industry to actually know the best way forward. But we also found that those who had already emerged stronger through disruption, or the recommendations of improving that, is actually to shift to also becoming a prioritizing active listening and understanding of the problem, to understand the system that we're working with. So it's not just the fact that I'm a knowledgeable expert and I will come in order to bring my expertise, but they're balancing that. And this comment here that you've made here about playing a dual role, an instruction designer, that's a really interesting comment that you've made in the chat room there, because as a project manager, you're going to be looking at the whole environment, the whole system that we're working with, and then bringing in your instructional design, which I think is really, really powerful, because it allows us more freedom. We don't have to create a program when we're looking at the business problem, when we're listening and understanding that business problem. And certainly in the research that I've found is that it's about making that shift from seeing ourselves as producers to enablers. And if we want to enable learning in the organization, or if we want to really, really make a difference, help the organization to be ready, embrace change, as you've said, then we need to be more open to listening rather than prescribing. Having a strong background in our profession, that absolutely helps. But particularly for those of you who are new, be listeners. You've got a great opportunity to be curious, to find out what's causing this problem. Just dig in deep. And disruption has created many of us an opportunity to ask questions that perhaps weren't expected of us in the past. I want to have a look at the next one here about our relationship with others. Do we see ourselves as being independent? This is learning and development. The learning and development team, we rely on our expertise in order to bring something to the business. Or do we see ourselves interdependently, working with other people, looking for ways to bring the outside in? I think this dual role that you were talking about in the chat room here, it's really interesting here, because certainly I found that the high-performing learning organization were those who were connecting and engaging with other people, getting the best from their partners, getting the best from their suppliers, working differently with the way that they work with marketing or with a particular line of business, but co-creating value and working together on a problem, bringing the silos down in order to come together with a like-minded purpose to drive the business forward. And again, that shift is certainly, we see that delivers better business results in that. In terms of timescales, I'm going to run on this one quite quickly. I think that often we think of ourselves rightly, because we're looking at the long-term investment of the talent pipeline, the leadership program, the way we onboard and keep people, the whole employee journey. Absolutely right to be thinking about the long-term capability goals. But often with that comes, don't ask me to do something quickly. Because, our mindset then is about, if you want quality, and I'm looking here in the long game, which is right, then we forget to act now. And certainly I found that those that are high-performing learning teams are more open to more agile ways of dealing with problems. And boy, have we had to do that over the last year. We've been thrown in at the deep end. But those who think, act now, and build the future, mean they have been able to change and adapt more quickly. So again, this is a both ends of the scale work, but if it to adapt quickly, to emerge stronger from disruption, the act now one is a really strong one. And then the last one around risk and innovation. And I'm just going to throw this out here because I think it's a little bit challenging. Is our approach to something new almost an approach to, I'll hold on, what's worked for me in the past, because that will define how I respond to something new? Or is it, well, what's worked for me in the past, almost a little bit Marie Kondo, I thank you for the service that you've given me, but now I have to be willing to let you go in order to embrace something that's new. And that mindset, that way of thinking, really shifts how we might respond better to business. Let me give you a quick example before we close and maybe open it up into some conversation and some questions and answers. So please start to put your questions and answers here. But, one thing I found in my research, and I'm sure it's the same over where you are, wherever you are in the world, is that most people have got some kind of content library that's made available to their teams and their staffs. So if we think about our content libraries and we think about it from a learning first, I'm here to solve learning problems, and maybe from an independent perspective that, I'm bringing this in for you. How would we think about our content libraries? Well, here are some examples. We might be thinking, I'm solving learning problems. You need content. My library can help you save money. I can reduce friction. I can provide you with more choice. These are the sorts of things that you can be doing with your library if you're solving a learning problem. If you're an independent thinker, predominantly relying on your expertise, you can say, well, I'm brought in, I'm here to evaluate vendors. I can curate across my library. I can develop playlists for you. But if we flip it around the other way and think about business first and being interdependent, then we start to think we've got exactly the same resource, exactly the same decisions. So I'm actually working with you on this project that you were talking about here on improving a specific critical task within the business. I wonder in what ways could my content library help? And am I willing, if it can't help in any way, to say I'm not going to use it? Because if it can't help, I'm not going to use it because my priority is business first. And equally about our content libraries, if we're thinking about interdependence, we might be thinking, well, who else is creating useful playlists from this to solve their own problems? What can I learn from them? How can I share that? You see how our thinking habits might influence the kind of decisions and the kind of approaches that we might have in that environment. So I guess some of the things that we think about in the past are kind of limit us. So again, we've got a few minutes, to run through here, and I'm happy to take some questions. But I have a question for you. Do you think that any of these thinking habits might limit us in terms of actually achieving our potential to really be a strong business partner? Do you think that any of these might be holding us back? Because if you do, then again, it's a reflective exercise, but it's something for us to consider there. So again, if you put your answers in there. Now, in the ebook, we've got these thinking habits in a kind of a self-coaching environment. Because one of the things about changing our habits is that sometimes we have to challenge ourselves. Like, for example, with business first. You often might think, well, actually, I need a seat at the table. I need to have more skills, more business acumen, etc., etc. But fundamentally, if you think your value is only through offering learning solutions, sometimes we have to challenge ourselves and say, well, actually, if the business really genuinely valued my ability to help them solve a problem, would that make a difference to my actions? A little bit of self-coaching here, self-reflection. Could be really powerful in terms of the way that we emerge into our new world of work. Equally, let's practice doing some of the things that you've been hearing about in the last 4 days. Let's practice the little things that are a little bit uncomfortable. Find those things that we can continue to try and do consciously. Say, I'm going to choose to look at this problem from a business first perspective, or from an empathetic explorer perspective. And practice doing some of the things that we've been recommended over the last 4 days and will continue to be recommended tomorrow. Do something, work on that. that will then support new thinking habits for us that will help us drive into the future. So we know stuff, we know what we ought to be doing, but are our thinking habits as a professional sometimes holding us back? I'd like to suggest maybe they are. Only you can answer that really for yourself. And this is, I just want to share last quote from Sarah Lindsell from PricewaterhouseCoopers, part of our Emerging Stronger program. You know, sometimes we've got to just be bold, do something, anything. Suggest something. Let's break the chain. Experiment, working with our relationships in new ways. You know, we've got a whole community of people around us, and certainly, you know, I hope you consider that I'll be part of your community now. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter. You know, follow up with our Emerging Stronger masterclass program. You know, it's part of helping us address some of those challenges, make experiments. So, you know, and back to what Catherine was saying this morning, you know, sometimes our learning journey needs to be about creating new habits, new behavior habits that then link to new thinking habits so that we can be the best that we can be. So Jennifer, I don't know if there are any questions that have kind of come through there, but I'm really happy to take those offline as well. And I hope this has been helpful for you today.
I think this is just like Catherine set the tone for the day. I think closing out with this today has been so helpful, just with everything that we've learned. And again, it's about taking those small things, just like you said, do something. You know, what are you going to do? Do something and turn things on their head a little bit, you know?
Yeah, it's our breakthrough moment. You know, never has a whole world been in so much disruption.
Right.
You know, if we haven't got an excuse to kind of challenge ourselves right now, then, you know, I think we probably would have missed an opportunity.
Right. And we have that opportunity to just kind of say, oh, well, this might not have worked. We can experiment in this time of disruption where normally we might not have been able to just experiment. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Try something else.
Absolutely.
So, I have not seen any specific questions, but I'm looking forward to having folks connect with you on LinkedIn and Twitter. So thank you, Laura, so much for being a part of today and closing us out today with such great information about how to move forward.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. We are in it together. Genuinely, yes. We are in it together. So do connect with me. Do check out the ebook. It's there on my LinkedIn profile under publications. Just go for it and let me know how you go.
All right. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to go into a closing session today and then into the talent fair for today. So I'll go ahead and end this session so we can get into that closing. Thanks, everybody.